Welcome, everybody. This is so very exciting. And before I introduce Soledad, who we are so thrilled to have here with us today, I think maybe can we do a big round of applause and a cheer that Soledad has been willing to come and speak to us today? Yes, whatever works. We're so delighted just to say how, yay, all right. This is a first. This is a first for Take the Lead. So we have this great program called 50 Women Can Change the World In, and we do it by industry or profession. And so we have done 2 cohorts of women in journalism last year and this year. And this is the first time that we have had these 2 cohorts of journalism together. So it's a very exciting day, and it's a very immersive program. And the women take they get our entire curriculum of redefining power, learning the 9 leadership power tools, and they're all in the throes, or at least the 2020 cohort right now is in the throes of doing their strategic leadership action plans. So I figured it would be a good time for them to have a little something that was fun because they're working really hard right now, and it's all good. So quick intro for Soledad, who I know you all know about, that she is an amazing broadcast journalist who has carved a path for herself that we want to talk about today, and how she did it with intention and in keeping with her values. And that's something that we've talked a lot about in our discussions. She's been the host of Matter of Fact with Soledad O'Brien for what, 4 years or so?
5 seasons. We're going into our 5th. Our season starts in September, so
okay,
our 5th season.
Great, wonderful. So that's with Hearst, and I first met Soledad when you were at CNN, and I think we were both babies at the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
At least you were, and it was several lives ago. A few things, other things that I know about Soledad is that she also is really a very sincere philanthropist, and she puts both her time and her treasure into helping young women get the kind of help they need to get their careers started and to be inspired to greater heights. And so hopefully we'll talk about that too. But Soledad, you're kind of a mosaic of America.
Yeah.
Kind of a mosaic of everything that America is about. The daughter of immigrants, from 2 different, very disparate countries. Triracial, I guess, would be.
My mom was Afro-Cuban and left Cuba in really not long before Castro came into power. So she didn't flee when Castro came into power. She left to start going to school before Castro came into power. And my dad is white and Australian. And
so I happen to be watching, as I mentioned to you earlier, I happen to be watching Henry Louis Gates' Ancestry show.
That's a great show.
It's a wonderful show. And I love it. I just love it. And people find out the most amazing things. And you certainly did. And I thought it might be interesting if you might just start by talking a little bit about what your background is in the larger sense, and what you learned there.
Well, the thing that was interesting about that show is I learned a lot. Often people like to dig into my mom's side of the family. And one of the things that I learned was that my great-great-great-grandmother was in fact a slave in Benin, Africa. So that was fascinating. But the show itself actually focused on my dad's side of the family. And they're just out and out criminals. I mean, I can't really clean that up for you. And so, but often I think because of their circumstances. So one of my aunts was very, in Scotland, was really challenged. Had a lot of kids, lost her husband, and so ended up having some thievery and burglary challenges, I guess is a good way to put it, and spent some time, I think over Christmas, they said, in jail. And some of her kids the same, and eventually they, on my dad's side, my dad was from Australia, made their way to Australia. It doesn't look like any of my family members, you know, as you know, it's a big point of pride if you have a family member who was put on a boat because often in order to populate Australia, if they needed engineers or they needed builders, right, they grab them and they put them on the boat and they bring them to Australia. So we can't claim that, sorry to say. Mine were just kind of petty criminals on my dad's side. My dad said when he was still alive, he used to say, oh, well, not shocked about that. But it was fascinating to really get a look. One of my aunts was amazing. Her husband in Australia, my great aunt, died and left her with 10 children. And he was a farmer. He was running a milling company. And it's amazing when you figure out your history, right? Because you begin to look for things in yourself that some of your relatives had. So she ended up taking over her husband's business. No one would give her loans and no one would give her any business. And she ended up going back to the farmers that she worked with and asking them to help her out, and went on to become wildly successful, running a Defiance Milling that was in business for a long time in Australia, but started off as a young widow who had 10 kids to feed. And so I think every time I watch his show, which I love, is it kind of reminds you how important your history is and understanding where you came from and understanding things about yourself. Like there's something about it that just makes you feel good about yourself to know where you come from, I think.
Well, interestingly enough, the first of my 9 power tools is know your history. And you can create the future of your choice. I can't agree with you more. And the fact that so much of women's history has never been recorded or has been erased is something that we need to change. We need to definitely fix that. So you had badass women in your background. You had a great role model.
Oh, just bad and some badass, but just bad.
Just bad. So your parents were married 8 years before the Loving case made interracial marriage in the U.S.
Yeah. So my little brother, I have a little brother. I'm one of 6. My little brother was born the same year that the Supreme Court overturned the ban on interracial marriage. And so my parents had 6 kids by the time the Supreme Court said interracial marriage is legal, which is kind of amazing when you think about it. My parents got married in 1958 in Maryland, which is one of 16 or 17 states where interracial marriage was illegal. And so they were living together and married as an interracial couple at a time in their state where it was illegal. They actually had to go to DC to get hitched and then drive back to Maryland in order to live. Eventually they would move to Long Island, but even then, even though interracial marriage was legal in Long Island, there were many struggles about trying to find housing for interracial couples. I mean, the discrimination and the redlining, all things that we don't really talk about much in terms of history, was rampant in Long Island, still exists in a lot of ways today, not the same way, but in a lot of ways. And so I think for my parents, and certainly for my work, I grew up with a really good sense of both tremendous opportunity. Both my parents went to college. They had a true vision of what they wanted their kids to do and achieve, but also a very clear sense about discrimination and the challenges with integration and information about race and racism and kind of a really deep understanding of those things that I think my contemporaries sometimes, and certainly in journalism, really didn't always fully understand.
You said that you since you grew up on Long Island, that
we call it Strong Island. Thank you.
Yes. So you grew up with a real feeling of difference in your
story. I had 5 brothers and sisters, so in a lot of ways we were a big team, and that was very, very helpful. But where I grew up was not diverse. I grew up on the North Shore in a town called St. James. It's pretty small, and so I would say, there were just no conversations about race. There was no critical mass around racial issues, and I think discrimination and racism and even understandings of like systemic racism, which even today I think people are challenged in talking about, those conversations just didn't happen. And so, it's interesting. Every so often someone would say something, I wrote about it in my memoir years ago, just something that was mean or cruel or nasty. But really, there were no conversations at all, and to the point where you never thought about, well, why are no people of color living here? Well, if you dug under the surface, you'd see lawsuits or also systemic things that actually kept people of color from accessing public housing, of which there was very little in part of town that I lived in, or accessing our very good public schools, things like that, you know. So often I think it's very clunky and hard to talk about systemic racism, but those are the big structural issues that keep people out. And when there's no critical mass, you know, your teachers never had a conversation about, like, well, where, you know, where is the diversity? How is it, why is that town full of black people, but this town is not? Generally, there's some rules and regulations and laws that are blocking those things. And I don't think, certainly when I was in high school, there was anybody who was all that interested in really digging into that and understanding it.
So, so you did some amazing programs on Black in America and Latino in America. Would you talk about those, and how did you, first of all, how did you negotiate to get to do them? Because I'm sure that wasn't just an easy slam dunk.
It was absolutely an easy slam dunk. I was just asked. It wasn't my idea. I had a boss who was interested in doing it. I mean, doing 9 years of them was a lot. Yeah. I'll take credit for that, but the idea was not mine. Okay. My boss asked me, he said, you know, we're thinking about doing a documentary, 6 hours, that looks at what's happened since the assassination of Dr. King. You know, so the first 2 hours was a look at the life and assassination of Dr. King, and then the next 4 hours looked at, so the promise of Dr. King, where are we in Black America, if you will, today? And so I was just honored to be asked and to dig into the piece. And what I really discovered once I kind of got into it was the degree to which, first of all, at the time, and even to this day, CNN didn't have a lot of people of color, right? So a lot of our conversations were very contentious, like, who do we cover? How do we tell this story? Whose voice are we using? What's the point of view in this? You know, and often, you know, people would point to data sets, and I'd be like, well, but that data set doesn't tell us anything other than these, you know, this data, like, who are the human beings whose stories we're telling? And so it was often, I mean, there was lots of that project that I really loved, but that was also very, very unpleasant. When we did Latino in America at CNN, I remember being around a big long table. I'm in my dining room table right now, by the way. And then we were sitting around this long table, probably 20 of us. And at some point we were having a debate around whether or not Latinos, would it be 48 million Latinos or 51? Because the number of Latinos would depend if you were counting Puerto Ricans, and would Puerto Ricans count as Americans, were the question. And I was like, we can just Google that. Like, we really, you know, like, I can save everyone a lot of time here. And it started to scare me when you realize, right, like that the team that was responsible for doing this groundbreaking documentary called Latino in America didn't really know that many Latinos and didn't include that many Latinos, right? I mean, if we're having an argument about something we can Google, I'm a little nervous now going forward. And I actually kind of shut that down. And then we started up again with a different team. But, you know, that's incredible pressure, and it's not fun. Like, it's miserable. I just remember being afraid. And remember, at the same time, Lou Dobbs was a big talking head on CNN who was vociferously anti-Latino, anti-undocumented people, but just unpleasant and nasty, which he continues to be to this day. And so, right, the network was trying to both sell that, but also this documentary about Latino in America. I remember when we were presenting that doc, people would get up and say, Soledad, we love you, we think you're great. But Lou Dobbs, you know, so but they weren't
the microcosm of America right now, I think.
They were not wrong. And so I understood what the frustration was in trying to appeal to this audience that was pretty rabidly anti-immigrant and anti-undocumented people, and then this audience over here, which included a lot of people who are obviously in mixed status families. So for me, journalistically, it was often, these conversations were often fraught because it felt like the stakes were so high that, you know, we didn't get to do them very frequently, and they were hard to do well. And that, you know, my girlfriend, one of my producers used to say, like, everyone's going to assume you wrote it, you shot it, you edited it, you know, so you're responsible for it. And I did take it on that way. Like, it matters. If we screw it up, we don't get to come back next year. The doc would go on, that series would go on for 9 years. We ended up doing, you know, Black in America over and over again. And it was often a slog. I mean, it was a fight. I'll give you an example. One of the stories we did was about a young woman named Gloria Feldt, who's a great young woman. Now not so young, probably 28 now, but she was 18 and graduating from high school. And we told the story of Gloria's trying to get into college, and kind of one of this high school that offered college level classes. In fact, the school took place on a community college campus so that the students could really have access. And I remember the producer doing the first write-through, and it was like this: Gloria Menifee's mother is a crack addict and her father is an alcoholic. And I was like, well, okay, those things, by the way, are true, but that's not the story of Gloria Menifee, right? Again, when we talk about point of view and bias and what we bring to how we frame a story, why does Gloria's story get framed by the dysfunction of her parents, which I would call deficit framing, right? Here's a person and here's all the crap that's wrong with them and challenging in their life, versus asset framing, right? Which would be how I write about every suburban little boy. Little Jimmy Smith is 12 years old. Oh, he loves baseball. Derek Jeter is his favorite player. And so he just got a new paper route because he's buying a glove and he's gonna oil it, blah, 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 right? We imbue that kid with agency, and we make that kid, and then eventually we'll say his mom's a doctor and his dad's a lawyer or whatever. But you begin to see very quickly for people of color, especially if they're poor, we imbue them with sort of everything that's wrong. And for people who are suburban, especially if they're white, we imbue them with all this potential and agency in their lives. And you begin to see it very clearly. And so a lot of my energy and effort over the years, but starting with Black in America, was how do you raise that flag and show people that we need to do a better job in how we think about telling stories. I am not advocating for us not to talk about Gloria Menifee's mom's drug addiction. It was very important in her life, and her dad's alcoholism, also hugely important in her life. But it's not her story. It's somebody else's story. And so it has to be in there, absolutely. But where is it in there? How do we frame the story is really critical. And I think we often in journalism don't talk that much about that.
So there's a tremendous reckoning going on, racial reckoning going on in the newsrooms right now.
Is there, or are we just talking about it?
Well, that's going to be my question to you. Exactly. That's exactly the question. I mean, is obviously one of the big issues that we talked about a lot in our cohort is how do you navigate racism in the newsroom right now in a way that can bring about positive outcomes. So what are your thoughts about that for women who are trying to figure it out right now?
I think the issue has always been in newsrooms that there's not people around the table, and when they aren't given a voice, right? So they're so happy to be around the table that they know they should just stand there and keep their mouth shut. So I think if you genuinely, and this is a big if, because I think often in newsrooms people do not actually want to hear from people. It's not a problem they genuinely want to solve. They want to get points for solving it, but they don't genuinely want to solve it. I think it's not so complicated. It's about making sure that the people who are around the table are diverse, that also have an opportunity to be included in the conversation, that their comments have weight and matter, and they're not just, yep, check the box, mm-hmm. And that you're really listening and doing the difficult thing, which I think is analyzing and assessing, are we doing the right thing? I had a lot of power when I was at CNN that I could shut down a documentary. Imagine, we spent the first 20 minutes talking about are Puerto Ricans Americans? Like, that's insane, literally. And I had the power to say, I'm not freaking doing this. That was it. But you often don't. And I think you see it today in newsrooms. NPR did a story, and I should look on my Twitter page because I retweeted it, where they were like, let's talk about race. I'm like, well, talk to me about the number of people of color at NPR. And don't tell me the ones who are cleaning the bathrooms and are greeting people and printing out IDs. Talk to me about those people in editorial positions who are making important decisions. Or let's stop caring. Like, we're all busy. We don't need, if you don't care, then just say, we don't care. But let's not pretend we care, but not measure those things. Because I can tell you exactly who's in what position. I have a very tiny company, but we're very intentional about how we think about diversity. And so I think the part that really frustrates me is this idea that everybody wants the points for doing it, but they don't actually want to make the difficult decisions around like, okay, how do we actually improve diversity? Some of those answers are we looking for employees in the wrong place? If we want black people, maybe we should be going to Howard and Spelman, where there's a whole heck of a lot of black people, right? There are certain colleges that literally way over index in Latinos. Maybe, I don't know, you should go there and look for some, if that's what you want to do. But this idea that it's all unknowable and there's this mysterious pipeline and we just can never find them. Every single black person I know who's in TV news knows 20 others and knows whether they have jobs, need jobs, and all, you know, so this idea, like once you start finding people, you find more people, but you have to actually hire them. Nobody wants to be part of a diverse slate that is some kind of BS that we all, you know, everybody talks, we all know, like, oh yeah, you're just being on the diverse slate because they need a diverse slate for later when someone asks. But they're actually going to hire this guy that everybody knows. I've been hired that way for some things, right? Everyone knows you're getting it. We just got to go now and do the interviews. I get it. So if you're, I guess I would argue for like, let's stop pretending.
So, if you're talking to a young woman or even a mid-career woman right now, who is in a newsroom like what you've described, how would you suggest that folks individually or together, I mean, obviously this is one of the things that we try to do in our program because we're building cohorts of women who will work together to make that kind of change, but they're not necessarily in the same newsroom. So how would, I mean, what are some techniques that you might suggest that might help women to actually move that dial, make it not just a perfunctory conversation, help people care about making sure that there's more of a diverse voice and storytelling?
My first technique will surprise you because it's do a great job. Literally, be amazing, right? Because the first thing you have to be is the absolute greatest employee that can possibly exist. And that means taking advantage of every opportunity. That means running around getting feedback even when people are reluctant to give you honest feedback sometimes. That means really finding the person who will say, yeah, you know what, your accent, I'm from Long Island, so I understand this. And sometimes it's a Spanish accent and sometimes it's a Long Island accent, right? Your accent might need some work if you want to work at other places. You need someone who's going to give you that kind of feedback appropriately and accurately. So for younger people, it is not about fighting the good fight. It's about making sure anytime someone puts you, in my business, on TV, that your stories are impeccable, they're well done, you're pitching all the time, and that you have really high value. One of the things I had to fight for when we did Black in America around season 2, people wanted to do these puff pieces. You know, this is a story of 6 great Black people who are doing, I'm like, no, but we wouldn't tolerate, that's not, I mean, they seem like very nice people and I'm, you know, like, they seem great, but that's not journalism. That's not the journalism we do. We look at systems and issues and dig into challenging questions of everybody, right? Like, we're holding ourselves to a high standard. And so I would say for entry level and young people who are new in their career, step 1, your standards need to be so high because you're going to be judged really, really aggressively. And so, listen, I got very used to people being, you know, thinking I was the affirmative action hire. So you might as well just be the amazing affirmative action hire. Like if that's what someone has in their head, I can't really help them with that. So I would say put yourself and get yourself put on the biggest projects. Make sure you're advocating for that. Make sure you're advocating for how does my writing get better? How does my storytelling get better? This person did a great job. Why is their script better than my script? All those things you can do with people helping you and sometimes without people helping you. You just have to do the legwork of it. Volunteering, right? On Saturdays, agreeing to do things that sometimes don't really, you know, pay you extra or pay enough. Doing the groundwork, just really working hard. To me, I think if you can do that, you're paving the way for your future. The fact that I spent so many years kind of working in the entry level stuff really allowed me as an anchor to be in the field doing all the stuff I needed to do. It was just being able to be better positioned to take opportunities and leaving the argument and the uncomfortable thing for the people who are in my generation, right, where we have a little more capital to be able to challenge a boss. Nobody likes a young person who's calling them out on racial issues. Like, let me promise you, everyone will smile at you and they'll be very nice, and you will be fired or disappear or be downsized, or however you want to frame it, in the next, whatever, 1 year, 2 years. Like, you will go away because it's uncomfortable for people to be challenged. So let's be very real about that. Nobody wants to hear, me included, as a CEO of my little company, I do not want some 20-year-old to be like, Soledad, over the weekend, I wrote up a list of 20 things that I think you're failing at. And here, that is not the strategy. Nobody wants to do that. So there's a whole technique in how you leverage the ability and the access and the work of more senior women to say, here are my concerns. I'm going to step back, but I'm going to fill you in on what's happening. And I want you guys to think about how you step forward. Which of these 10 things are the important things to fight? It's not going to be 10. It might be 1. It might be 2. Mm-hmm. So I think it's about being more strategic, because whenever I see young people who are out there fighting really hard, I always think this is the energy that should be used in learning the skills. You need to be able to say, actually, I have the skills. And I always share a quick story. I'll share. There was a guy, when I worked in local news, WBZ in Boston, there was a guy who, we had a morning meeting, started at 7 a.m., but I did the show that was on before the Today Show. I was an associate producer. So our show ended at 7:00. I would leave that show, leave the control room, run to the bathroom, come to the morning meeting, but it meant I got to the morning meeting at like 7:05, 7:06. So I was late every day because I was doing the show. And there was a guy named John in my meeting who used to always make cracks about, oh, Soledad's running on color people's time. Oh my God, so, and yeah, right. Mm-hmm. And I remember it, but I will tell you, I'd go home and I'd think, when he says that, here's what I'm going to say. He's going to do this and I'm going to do that. I spent so much time thinking about this guy named John. I should name him, but I won't, but I should, but I won't. I never saw him again when I left that job. Do you know how much psychic energy I put into that bowl? So much. And I literally tell people, don't do what I did. Focus on growing your career. Focus on opportunities. Focus on staying late, making your writing better, making your reporting better. Focus on getting to know your boss. Focus on understanding, how did that person get hired? What skills do you need for this? Don't focus on those stupid, catty, racist, unpleasant, dopey things, misogynistic things that people say. What a waste of energy. What a waste. I look back, and I really should name him, but I won't. But, right? Like, what a waste. Yeah. And it didn't matter. I had a zillion little witty comebacks that I never could actually pull off. I wish I'd taken all that energy. And especially now in coronavirus, right? We got to manage our energy.
Right.
We put that energy into, how do I grow Soledad O'Brien?
Yeah. The management of our psychic energy is super important I think just in life in general, but certainly for anyone who wants to move forward, who wants to be a leader, who wants to, I mean, this is like, I have to relearn that lesson every day. And you're so right. Don't let them get you down.
I really got better at it, because what I realized was someone like John, and yes, someone on the chat is asking, is John white? Yes, John was very white. It was up to me to decide whose energy. I think certain things do rise to the level of being, this has to be a conversation with HR, or this has to be a conversation with my boss. Mm-hmm. A lot of stuff in newsrooms does not rise to that level. And you have to really make sure that you're protecting your psychic energy and working on projects that will grow you, and not getting stuck in those things that are going to suck you under.
So I want to throw this.
I've been in television news 31 years. I have never seen him again. I've never even heard of him. Like, gone.
That's the best revenge, actually.
I don't even know. I have no idea where he is. So it's just weird.
You're doing fine.
What a waste. What a waste.
Oh my gosh.
People are saying, name him. Oh, I should, but not today.
Someday. So I see there are a bunch of questions in the chat, and so let's
lots of comments.
Lots of comments. Is there anything you want to particularly pick up on?
There's an interesting point from Maritza, which is sometimes we're uncomfortable even to other Latinos or Blacks in position of power. That's a really interesting point, although that wasn't my experience at NBC or at CNN, I really felt like when people of color were in power, there was like what we used to, that secret nod, right? Someone gets in the elevator, all the black people like, hey, hey, Latinos too, right? We do the, And so I think that was never my experience, and that might be her experience, but never my experience. I think people really were advocating and had been pushing very hard for a lot of diversity. So they kind of knew if you could bring someone in at a senior level, that would probably open up opportunities for more people of color.
Mm-hmm. So another one of the questions that came up a lot in our cohort this year, and particularly as it related to the passion that people are feeling around racial justice at this moment in history, is objectivity. And is it possible? And is it I'm not a journalist. When I write, I get to just pontificate. So I I don't even know how to think about this question, but
I
I
think we
wonder
often
if you do.
confuse objectivity with believing that the audience is full of white people and that we're writing for them, right? So to me, I always say, I don't really care about someone's point of view as long as they're telling me where they're from, right? So I want to know, but this idea that somehow having a background or a point of view is a bad thing, I don't think is always true. I actually thought being Afro-Latino in covering Black and American Latino America was helpful. Like I felt like I was an insider and an outsider. I could push people harder because I knew the issues well.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I feel like what does it mean to be objective? Is it having no opinion whatsoever on something? Is it having no background? I'm more than happy to hear what I've tried to do, and certainly for a matter of fact, we try to elevate the point of view and the discussion of experts, right? So if you are the ambassador to China, then I want to talk to you about China. I might agree with what you're saying, I might disagree, but you have a level of expertise that will inform and educate my public in a way that's going to be valuable. Obviously that person has a point of view, right? It's going to depend what administration were they brought in, what were their experiences like, all of that stuff, and I get to provide that context. But I think they have something to say. But this idea that nobody has an opinion on anything is kind of odd and just weird. I'd much rather have them say, listen, I grew up in a trailer park, so I found blah, 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 blah. Here's my point of view, and I want to understand their point of view, I guess I would say. I think pretending people don't have a point of view is a mistake. I don't think it's accurate. I also think my point of view on certain things is utterly irrelevant in a story. If I'm doing a story on the best flavors of ice cream, I might tell you I only eat chocolate, it's the only kind I like, but really who cares, right? I'm not an expert. Hopefully I'm going to do a good job making sure you're hearing from lots of interesting people that you're going to say, wow, that was a great story that she did. I understand she doesn't eat anything but chocolate, but who knew, blah, 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 right? Like that's the goal. Otherwise, are women not allowed to do stories on women? Are Black people not allowed to do stories about people of color? I mean, it would be, are Latinos not allowed to, are Asians not allowed to cover the president's slurs about coronavirus? Of course not. That would be insane. So I think it's much more about kind of transparency and making sure that you are covering people fairly and always elevating experts.
Pavni has a question about how does the experience of discrimination / double standards impact the way you think about your own abilities, and how do you fight that and not let it diminish your self-belief?
I think to a large part, the story of one's arc of one's life is figuring out what you believe and what your values are, and some things that I wish I'd been able to do at 20. I've kind of figured out by the time I was 50. I always tell people, maybe you don't have to wait till you're 50. I just think you both want to be able to learn and hear and listen to people, but also push back hard so people understand certainly the expertise that I have in journalism and reporting. I know some of the things that we're seeing right now are not good and not okay and not true. But I think that's kind of life. I think what you're describing is that arc of like your life. Some things you're able to to get right away and feel good about in yourself. And sometimes it takes a long time to get there. For me, I got there when I got more expertise in reporting. I felt more comfortable. When I stopped being a daily reporter, I certainly felt more comfortable and able to call out some of the things that I thought were egregious because I'm not reporting on these issues. The show that I do is around policy, not really politics, if you will. So, I don't know that self-belief is something like, oh, if you just do this, you'll get self-belief. Self-belief takes time.
It takes time. You grow the muscles. You grow the muscles by doing, I think, and getting that feedback. Okay, so Margarita asks, what excites you? What excites you about the current movement for change in newsrooms, and where do you see the opportunities for change?
I would say I think this is the first time in a long time that I've really felt like people are actually trying to figure it out. I only care about these movements when other people step in and they're surrounded by dollars, right? Because everybody loves to give a nod to something, but what really moves the needle is money. It's somebody funds something. So I think we're beginning to see people recognizing that their diverse audience, one, America's becoming more diverse, number two, that diverse audiences spend tons of money, and number three, that there's great opportunity there. And so I think you're seeing people actually start investing money, right? Hiring people, not just, this is a really important thing and we're going to try to do better, but actually saying, you know what, we are going to find these people and hire them. So I think we're beginning to see that. I've been in part of a number of calls and events from organizations who are really trying to solve the problem of hiring. Like they want to have this difficult conversation. And so I think that's pretty good. And that's different from what I've experienced over the last 20 years.
So it's hopefully a moment of opportunity. I mean, in the chaos that's going on right now, my personal hope for not just journalism, but every situation where women may have been experiencing discrimination and difficulty and racial injustice and all of these things, chaos is always a time when boundaries are more malleable and people are open to ideas that they wouldn't have been open to in other situations. So how do we help ourselves be calm enough to take those opportunities?
There's opportunity in chaos, right? That's a line that one of my very first bosses said. There's opportunity in chaos. And so when you start looking at it that way, you start being a little more strategic about how you think about chaos and how do you ferret out and tease out the opportunity. I agree with you. I mean, when I started working in TV news, very pre-Me Too movement, sexual harassment was obviously a thing that people whispered about, but everybody knew. There was no one to tell. And if you told HR, one, they'd probably just laugh you out of the office. Or if they didn't, it would come back to bite you. Like I've had conversations with people who were my peers when I was 20, and I was like, here's what will happen. Like there was no point that early on where people were like, wow, this is terrible. We can't believe this is happening to you. We need to get rid of this executive. This is, it didn't happen that way, right? People did not care. They had said, you are a production assistant and you make $25,000 a year. This person is the senior executive of whatever. They make $250,000 a year. Obviously, we'll just get rid of you. I mean, that was the reality. And so a lot of the conversations, people would put out statements, we really care, blah, 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 but the actual practicality was, it was not fair. I think that's changing. I think many organizations, partly because of the financial hit, partly because of the PR hit, partly because I hope better people are in some positions, are saying, this is not cool, this is not okay, and we will get rid of those executives. We will, because they are a liability. They're a liability for our shareholders. They're a liability to our good name. They're a liability for us being able to get other people to work for us. So I think things have shifted. I think that's amazing. So people should feel good about those shifts. They just take time, and they come at a cost of constantly, people putting their neck out and advocating for those shifts.
Right. So there's a lot of conversation going on in the chat right now about the Black mentorship burnout is real. People are being called upon to advocate not just for themselves but for other people, and at the same time that they're experiencing they're having the experience of discrimination and implicit bias themselves.
Yeah, I'll
And
tell you.
I want to get, there's a particular, Angelie had a question and I'm trying to, okay, how do we in the middle and later stages of our careers meet this moment? So that's kind of a mishmash of
That's a
several people's questions, but I think they're all interrelated.
Totally got it. Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and they are related. So there was a guy at Google who I was once interviewing, a black technologist. So of course you can imagine a black technologist who worked at Google, and he was on a panel. And one of the things he said to me was, I'm on every panel. And I think it's important because I'm one of the, there's not that many of me, right? I'm a software guy who codes at Google. Like, I'm a little bit rare.
Yeah.
And he's like, so it's really important to me to be on those panels because I want people to see me and say, oh, this is something I could do if you're younger. He said, but the way I'm judged is the projects that I'm doing. I get no points for being on panels, right? No one says, oh, you know what, he did 3 panels, he's been, and so I think that that's part of the answer for the middle people and the senior people, right? Understanding that mentoring takes time, takes energy. And so those mentors actually have to get the credit for doing that, that's a piece of a job. You know, if they were booking town cars, you'd be like, yeah, well, booking town cars takes 2 hours a day. That's a job. It's a separate job, you know. But mentoring is actually harder, I would argue, than booking town cars and takes a long time. And so I think his issue was, I'm doing this thing, it's important, the company values it, but when it comes to thinking about my compensation and my time, there's no place where it fits in, here's what he does. I am a software engineer and it's all about my projects, but I spend time doing panels, which everyone would argue is valuable. So I think it's the same thing. I think senior people have to have those conversations with some of the leadership that are often, most frequently, not people of color, right? And explain that and figure out, okay, so then how do we think about compensating those people, giving those people time? How do we think about creating spaces for these awkward conversations? How do we make sure that awkward conversations are okay? And people get to ask stupid questions and say things that are bad and awkward and inappropriate. And everyone says, well, here, let me explain to you why that's not a good thing. When I was covering a story in Thailand, I had little kids at the time, and I would rest my hand on the heads of kids who were kind of like up to my hip, you know? And finally, someone took me aside and said, touching a child on the head in this culture is one of the most disrespectful things you can do. I was so mortified. I had no idea. But I was so grateful, right? Like, this guy didn't have to say that to me. And I was covering a story, right? So everybody was being very, very nice to me. They wanted to have a good story told. And I actually was so appreciative that he was saying, what you're doing is wrong. It's culturally wrong. Don't be an idiot and let me save you from yourself. And so I've tried to have that same feeling, right? Like, when we navigate these awkward conversations about race or gender, whatever, you know, you have to have this idea of like, help me help you. And I'm going to be the one who tells you this because maybe other people won't, that when you use this word, it's not okay. When you call someone this, it's not okay. That word there is actually a slur. Maybe you thought you're being funny, you are not, right? And the person who does that is being very kind and being very helpful to someone who is trying to navigate a space that they may not feel very comfortable in. I think that can be the role of senior people, of we're going to help be the conduit. So our younger employees who really need to be focused on their work don't have to be having these higher order and higher level fights, arguments, conversations, which are very stressful and very frequently derailing of their careers.
Right, right. So I think we're going to have time for maybe one more question. And as often happens, all of a sudden, the chat is like exploding. So we'll probably, we're going to have some time afterward to keep on discussing some of these things. And I'm going to ask, there was a question from Danny, and it's now disappeared from my chat. I can't find it. Let me see if I can, this is kind of a good wrap-up question, I think, Soledad, although I have one more small one afterward. Can you talk about your decision to become more vocal around issues of race and power in news? I remember you as a straight news reporter, and then there was a pivot and you took on a different role, which made your perspective more known. What prompted that shift, and what has it meant for your career?
For me, a lot of it was running my own company. I don't have a boss. And so I think if you are working for an organization that has very clear social media rules, then you should stick to them. Because if you don't, you'll get fired. And you should get fired. You should stick to the rules. You are not, you are not exempt from the rules that should cover everybody. I am self-employed. I run my own company. I stick to the rules of Soledad O'Brien Productions day in and day out. But that also means that a lot of what we do and what I think I can do and where I think I can add value is having very honest conversations about some of the failures of journalism, whether they're around race or whether they're around content and how we think about issues. I'm sort of free to do that because I made a lot of money at CNN that I was able to pour into my company, and I have a company that's been profitable since we started. And we do a lot of different things. So I'm not sort of working for someone and having to couch what I have to say. So I've always tried to be very blunt in these, a lot of what I say now are things that I used to say to my bosses. Sometimes they just didn't like hearing it. But really, it was not a big turn for me. I think it's just consistently what I've been doing, but not necessarily publicly. And of course, social media has changed a lot as well.
Right. Well, with the response that I'd like to have, just to say to what you just said, is that you obviously use that position and power that you have to help advance other people and to help change the systemic injustices that are out there. And personally, I want to thank you for that because it helps everybody. Not, there are so many people who do make a lot of money somewhere and then they go start their company, or they start their company and they make money, or whatever it is, who don't necessarily take that as also being a responsibility to help the next person along. So just for myself, I just want to say thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. We're in crazy times. And I do think that we have an obligation, if we're willing to stand up for it, to say those things that sometimes people don't want to hear. Not everyone's going to do that. And by the way, 20 years ago, maybe I wouldn't have been one, right? So I don't fault people for that. I just think that my career arc is very different from when I started, and I'm completely cool with that.
So, so I wanted to say to all of our 2 cohorts that are here, and we also have some of our leadership ambassadors and some of our rest of our team are here. Everybody wanted to hear what you had to say, Soledad. Thank you so much. And we are going to we will stay here and continue the conversation for the next half hour with anyone who wants to stay. And I hope you all will. But I have one last question for you, Soledad, before I let you go, which is, what have you done? What have you not done yet that you want to do? What's coming next from Soledad O'Brien?
And I think that's actually what's made it very easy for me to be critical of TV news, because I don't do very much in TV news anymore. A lot of what we do in our production company is we create content. So we do shows. I executive produce them. I'm sometimes in them, but often I'm not in them. And we're starting to do scripted projects, which has been very exciting. I sometimes get to be in movies, but I'm not a good actor, so I get to play myself, and that's it, which is probably good for the world. But really, for the most part, I try to do less. I'm trying not to do daily stuff. I'm trying to do more creative things just for me personally, and also get, I'd say, probably the biggest thing on the production side, get more into scripted work.
Thank you. Any last remarks that you want to make?
No, I'm very excited to be part of this conversation. I think, again, these are not conversations that were happening 15 years ago. And so it really is an indication of the time, I would argue, or maybe encourage anybody who's in these conversations to remember, these things are emotionally grueling. So you gotta, go hang out with a puppy and go pet a horse and go do fun things. What you don't want at the end of a long career, you don't want to be joyless. You want to be full of joy, because that really is what drives everybody crazy, ultimately.
Wise words. Thank you so much, Soledad. I know you've got to run to another shoot. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Nice to chat with you guys. So long.